This is a review of Extreme Meat Punks Forever, bound by Ash, the second chapter in the Extreme Meat Punks Forever trilogy. It, along with the first episode, can be found on itch.io and can be purchased for $15. Just like episode 1, it took me around 3 hours to complete it, and just like episode 1, I heavily recommend it. To quote the game, it is a serial visual novel / mech brawler about gay disasters beating up neonazis and giant robots made of meat, and I agree completely. I don't want to repeat myself too much, so I will cover everything that's different from the first episode, so you might want to watch my video on episode 1 for a recap of the series. Some of my complaints with the gameplay have been addressed, however, new and interesting problems have cropped up as well. Much like the first installment, it is an action game with visual novel sequences and an overall strong story. There have been several drastic changes to the art style, although the overall art direction returns. The overall art style, including the ACAB style, has returned. However, the models for the characters are very different. While playing, I got the impression that the creator was trying out different art styles to see which one would fit best. While it's good to experiment, I think that the creator should have stuck with one main art style. Additionally, I preferred how the main cast looked like in the first game. My main complaint is how they change how Cass looks like. It is stated in-game that Cass is non-binary. However, they seemed a bit more feminine in the first game, while in the second episode, they seem much more masculine. The creator could have chosen to present Cass as this, to make us feel their dysphoria. However, I would have preferred it if it was clearer and more consistent. The more animated and fluid movements of the mechs are very welcome, and make them contrast more against the background in all the best ways. The change in design of the mechs and the enemies are a lot more welcome, and they all look a lot more expressive as a result. The differing designs between the background and the characters makes the characters take a lot more center stage in the game, rather than being a bit ugly like they were in the first episode. The surreal background of the first game is nice, but when I look at an enemy or NPC, I prefer it when I can see what I'm supposed to be looking at. The music, to put it simply, fucks severely. A few older tracks return, but the new tracks really stand out and add a whole new dimension to the game. It's all amazing, although the new and remixed tracks greatly improve upon the original tracks. They keep with the main feel of the previous episode's music while adding their own pizzazz. All the music fits well within the game and completes it. When you get knocked down in a fight, the music slows down a bit, which is a nice detail. The gameplay is essentially the same as in the first episode, but with a few twists and turns which keeps things interesting. Overall, you fight mechs by knocking them off a ledge, with frequent story breaks that take the form of a visual novel. The visual novel segments are very simple, with you just picking from a few similar options. At certain points you pick from whom to view the perspective from, which adds replay value. Overall, the game is very easy except for the final boss. It would be great if there was a difficulty setting added in future installments. This would also add replay value. At the beginning of each combat section, you get to choose who to play as, which adds replay value as all the different characters have different abilities. At certain points in the story, you find combat upgrades for 2 of the characters, Cass and Brad. Cass receives recoil, which reverses their momentum after being punched. I found it very tricky to time it right, and, as a mistake meant being punched and potentially shoved off the edge, I usually didn't choose them for this reason. Brad's upgrade is significantly better. His ability is an extra strong punch with 1 second's delay. If you time it right, it's pretty easy to one-shot enemies. I would almost go as far as to say that it's unbalanced, as Brad is now significantly better than everyone else. Luckily, you get it at the end of the game, so it's not a huge issue or anything. Another thing that was added on the gameplay side of things was more enemy types. There was one new enemy type added, the mutant rat wolf. There is a small variant and a larger variant. The smaller variant is faster but does less damage, while the larger variant is the reverse. I feel like I should add that the game never really feels barren or that it's missing pieces. This is an improvement over the first game, where the gameplay felt a bit barren and stale towards the end. Overall, the character upgrades you receive and the new enemy variant adds enough to make the gameplay much stronger and adds a much needed variety to it. Talking about the bosses in the game, would spoil the story, so I will talk more about them later. In this section, I will summarize the story. However, there is a bit too much to be able to go through everything, so I will summarize the main story events and beats and my thoughts on them. It is very well written and has lots of representation, which, as a trans femme NB, I really like. I will also say that the ending feels a bit dragged out and rushed at the same time, and I can't help but wonder if there wasn't a better way to tie up loose ends. The game is best experienced spoiler-free, so if you're thinking of playing the game for yourself, I recommend that you stop watching the video at this point. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. The game starts by asking you to load a save file from episode 1 and goes over the choices you made. While this is welcome, there isn't actually much you can change apart from a few minor details. The game begins 2 days after the destruction of Hopeville, and everyone's still shaken from the events of the last episode. On their way to Devil's Teeth to find out more about how the fascists are controlling the sun, the meat punks rescue a pair of punks from a group of fascists. After being rescued, the 2 punks mention that they have to get to a gig. They say that they need a new member to realign their vibes, and pick Brad after he stutters and does an ACAB. They also convince the other meat punks to help them. They head over to the Devil's Atlas, a nearby bar. Cass talks to Liana about how they're feeling that they are becoming a different person. They mention how they've started to feel again after repressing emotions and being depressed for a long time. Then, the performance by Brad and the 2 punks you rescued starts, and you play a short Guitar Hero-esque sequence. It doesn't matter what buttons you press, the game will tell you that you are doing badly, and it feels like you're making constant mistakes. This is actually a very good visualization of trying to play an instrument that you've never played before. The game doesn't tell you how well you actually performed. The punk couple will praise you and tell you how bloodthirsty you got the crowd. Cass thinks to themselves about their mech name and why it isn't working as well as it should, and how they have to figure out the problem before their mech name stops working completely. That night, Cass and Brad work on Cass's mech, and Cass figures out a new mech name. Next morning, after meeting with the crew, Cass talks about how they've started to feel emotions again after being depressed for a long time. They have clearly been depressed for quite some time, possibly including dysphoria and self-hatred. It is very cathartic to see them recover from this, especially as a trans person who struggles with mental health issues. The bond between Cass and Liana grows stronger, and they will save each other once per combat encounter. This means if you play as either Cass or Liana, you get 1 extra life before having to restart the combat section. While this is a neat idea, it would have been more impactful if the game had been harder, or if the combat sections had been longer. As it stands, I didn't feel much of an impact while playing. Along with their new name, Ultra Light Scavenger, they receive a new secondary ability. Instead of halting their momentum, this new ability reverses it. This means that if they get punched, they can get right back into the fight. Unfortunately, it's very hard to time it right, and if you make a mistake, you open yourself up to getting punched. It is a bit unfortunate and jarring that after this dramatic character growth, the ability that comes with it is very underwhelming, to the point of incentivizing me not to pick Cass, as every other character had better abilities. After this segment, the chapter ends with Cass and the crew reaching Devil's Teeth, Liana's hometown. After you enter the town, you control the crew from a top-down, RPG-esque perspective. You walk around the town during an ongoing festival, interacting with certain objects to gain story crumbs, and bits of dialogue. You can choose to skip it and go straight to the objective if you wish. This segment repeats, with short, visual novel-esque sequences in between. Each time you interact with the same objects, but the dialogue and story crumbs vary slightly. This section drags on and doesn't fit with the rest of the game at all. It's fine as a short experiment, but I can't help but feeling if it couldn't be shortened, or removed entirely. While it isn't terrible per se, it feels very tacked on and unnecessary. Question marks note where there's an optional interactive object, while the exclamation point marks the critical path. The crew meet up with Cass's brother, who tells them about the giant mech Atlas holding up the bridge above Devil's Teeth. He explains how a company wanted to clear paths through the forest to make transportation easier, and built the Atlas to do so. The bigger the mech, the harder it is to control, and Jake still doesn't know how they managed to control it for as long as they did. Regardless, they succeeded, and the Atlas trampled forests and villages to make a path, until it reached Devil's Teeth, when it stopped. The pilot died, and the company built a road around its arms and called it a day. Jake hypothesizes that hesitation killed the pilot. Cass asks him about the sun, and he says he will ask around for it, but he needs a favor in return. Jake tells the crew about strange shadows moving in the night that move away whenever anyone gets too close. Since they're coming from the direction of the Atlas, he believes that finding out the source of the strange shadows will help them uncover the mystery of the Atlas mech. Cass agrees, believing that it shouldn't be too dangerous, as the shadows leave if people get too close. Sam and Brad walk around the festival, and, while dancing, bump into Jason. Jason mentions how he's on his way to the city, and how everyone he's met has been, quote, really nice. This is a big red flag and foreshadows what happens later. Next morning, the crew plan to head out into the forest. Jason asks if he can tag along, and Sam convinces the rest of the crew to agree. Jason is Sam's best friend from his hometown before he joined the Meat Punks. He gaslights Brad into making him believe that Sam doesn't love him. He further torments Brad to the point that Brad takes point over and over again to prove his worth to the crew and to Sam. He does this until he has a mental breakdown and is almost killed by the god of the forest, who controls all of the mutant rat wolves inside the forest. Brad is rescued at the last minute by Sam, and when they regroup, Jason is exposed for his treachery and admits that he has been working with the fascists. This enrages Sam and they fight. For all of his build-up, he's a bit of a pushover. You have to defeat him 5 times, and I didn't lose a single round. He runs away into the forest after being beaten. The crew decide to leave via a tunnel filled with fascists in order to avoid the god of the forest. Before they leave, Brad mentions how he always had to fix and maintain his mech using spare parts he found lying around. This has made him extremely good at salvaging, which means he goes hog wild inside this abandoned mech factory they found while fleeing the god of the forest. Using spare parts, he replaces his old ability, which could knock back enemies a large distance while knocking him out, with a new ability. This new ability allows him to knock back enemies with no cost, but takes roughly 1 second to take effect. This new ability makes Brad the best character in the game. While I enjoyed using it, there's no real reason to pick either Sam, Cass, or Liana anymore, as Brad is hands down the best character now. Obviously, this is not ideal, and I would like to see them improve the balance in the next chapter. Brad bashes all of the fash in the tunnel, and the crew emerge out the other side. They find Devil's Teeth burning down. Liana, who stayed in Devil's Teeth to catch up with her mom, explains how the mutant rat wolves showed up and started attacking people. She doesn't know who started the fire. The group decides to split up in order to cover all of their bases. Sam volunteers to protect the unprotected Atlas mech, while Brad and Liana team up to clear out the town, and Cass heads off into the forest to finish this once and for all. You then cycle through each group. Who you pick only changes the order of how this happens. Sam fights his way to the Atlas mech to ensure that no one gets to use it. Since there's no way to get to the Atlas without jumping from a tall height, he decides to wait for a signal from the others. Brad and Liana fight their way through mutant rat wolves and meet a stranger wearing a VR visor. The mystery man explains that they met back at the fair a while ago. He goes on to explain that he is not a fascist, but working with them against the Meat Punks. He only tells us that he is working for a higher power. He explains that he took control of the mutants for his own ends. It's clear that if he's killed, the rat wolves go back to doing nothing, which is what they were doing when he found them. A boss fight then starts, very reminiscent of the boss fight at the end of the previous installment. You must bash him several times into the flames in order to kill him. Every time you shove him into the flames, he teleports away, but gets hurt a little bit more each time. After punching him into the flames for a 3rd time, he teleports onto a platform above you, and calls in mutant reinforcements. You then have to survive for 1.5 minutes against an unending wave of mutants. Overall, I enjoyed this boss fight, although the mystery man kind of comes out of nowhere. After you survive the mutant rat wolf onslaught, the radio turns on. You hear a pact being forged between Cass and the god of the forest, and the mutant rat wolves devour the VR man. As his last act, he orders a sunstrike on his location. Before he dies, Liana asks him who he works for. He tells her about how he and his organization does not work for any person, but rather a being who has given them enormous power, including the power of the sun. The sky darkens, and we jump over to another character. Cass fights their way through the forest to meet its god. It tells Cass that Devil's Teeth is about to be nuked by the sun, just like Hopeful was, and the only way to prevent that from happening is for Cass to become part of it. Before this happens, it offers to explain certain events. Months ago, it felt a radio pulse, and many parts of itself became disconnected from the whole. In order to survive, it needs to regain its lost biomass. As the person who did this plans to destroy Devil's Teeth, it offers to cooperate with Cass. When asked, it explains that they do not know if Cass will survive. However, there will be a being that will know themselves as Cass and will have their memories. I appreciate how the god of the forest is characterized. It is not evil, rather it is just trying to survive in its own way. Pact is made, and we turn back to Sam for the final act. Over the radio, Sam hears that a sunstrike is imminent. In order to stop it, he needs to get into the cockpit from the bridge that it is holding up. He leaps off of the platform. Sam jettisons out of his mech and lands safely within the cockpit of the Atlas. He straps himself in and angles the bridge that the Atlas is holding up to block the sunstrike. Sam wakes up 3 days later, and Brad berates him for being willing to sacrifice himself. Jake enters the room and explains what he has found after researching the sun. It disappeared 50 years ago. The sunstrikes are not the sun's true form, rather they are cylindrical cones of pure energy taken from the sun. This event marks the 11th time a sunstrike has struck Meatworld. The first strike occurred 50 years ago, while most sunstrikes occurred in the last 20 years. The frequency of the sunstrikes appear to be increasing. The first sunstrike left no damage and occurred at the city of MF. Jake says that there will be answers there, but also immense danger. Any person could be a fascist, or a servant for him, a mysterious figure of great power. He further warns that the city of MF is the most dangerous area in all of Meatworld. The group all agree to head there, and to name themselves the Devil's Teeth Meatpunks. Overall, I enjoyed the story immensely, and felt that all of the characters were very well realized. I look forward to the next and the final installment of Extreme Meatpunks Forever. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like and subscribe for more content. After this video comes out, I should be able to make much more content on a much more regular basis. Look forward to it.